Right. My name is James Whiting. I'm the chair of the Teacher Education Intersection at TESOL. And it is my great pleasure this afternoon to welcome you all to our February webinar, the last in this year's, the year being March to March, our last webinar of the year. And we're so happy that we have two really wonderful folks. Laura Becca from Hunter, who is, of course, a past chair of TEIS, and Beth Clark-Gareka from Binghamton University. So two New Yorkers there, doing a really wonderful and interesting presentation for us. And I really want to thank them so much for taking the time out of their busy academic lives to do this for us this afternoon. As we can see on the slide here, they're going to be talking about, as you know, using authentic writing samples in TESOL teacher education classrooms. And so just to remind you, this is being taped, and the tape will go out to the public on the TESOL YouTube channel. And so you and your questions and everything else will be out there on that. And I want to just also thank other folks who are joining us here today. I see we have Nikki Ashcroft, another past chair of TESOL TEIS, and Heather Linville, the incoming chair, is with us as well from Wisconsin. And so thank you all for being here this afternoon. I'm going to just turn it over to Laura and Beth, and we'll have questions after they speak, and then we'll try to end right a little bit before 2 o'clock, around 2 o'clock this afternoon, Eastern time. Thank you, Laura and Beth. Take it over. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth is doing all the work, so I'm just I'm just a Vanna White today. That's why I have my red lipstick. So I'm ready for you to assist. Want to thank you both for Heather and James for the wonderful invitation, and we are very honored to be among all of you wonderful colleagues. If you could open up the chat, it's really nice to see where everyone is from. This is a really nice chance to network and get to know each other, and that's the other benefit besides learning some great things you can put into your TESOL preparation courses, the collegiality as well. And I see some really neat places. And Stephen, my son, is at Ohio State. He's in Columbus, Ohio right now. So we have a lot of connections as you start to see different places. Make sure to jot people's names down, reach out to them. So Beth and I did this session at TESOL. It's all Beth. It's all her work. I am literally her sidekick, so it was very nice of her to put my name on here. But I'm going to turn it over to Beth, and I'll be kind of chiming in here and there. So thanks again for having us.
Well, thanks, Laura. Always too modest. We definitely did this together, and it's always a blast to be with Laura Becker in any kind of space. So excited to be here. Thanks to TEIS, and let's get going. So, Laura and I are both teacher educators here in the state of New York. We work primarily with students that want to be ESOL teachers, and in collaborating and commiserating a little bit about the nature of this work, one thing that we discovered was how difficult it is to find authentic writing samples online or in any kind of organization. These are Laura, just for your information, these are the links to the slides. These will be available, but these are all the links that we'll be using throughout the presentation today. So we realized that authentic writing samples, particularly of students, and we work primarily with teachers who work with K-12 students, is finding authentic writing that children are actually doing, and that we can present to our candidates and have them have real experiences with that writing. And we found a need for it in our assessment courses, in our grammar courses, and in our methods courses. In the assessment courses, because that's part of the work of an ESOL teacher, is to take a piece of writing and to figure out, okay, what's going well, what's not, what's the next step. Same for grammar. I have taught grammar for several years at the graduate level, and I use authentic writing samples a lot for students to recognize how grammar is used in real writing, and for them to understand, unlike sometimes the work that we get or that we find in textbooks, it's not as consistent. You know, their students' use of grammatical features is not consistent across a writing piece. And, you know, as we know about interlanguage, sometimes they have correct forms in some areas and not in others. And so this is a good way for students to recognize that. And then in our methods courses, always when we are preparing students for the work that they'll do in classrooms, just thinking about what kinds of things do students produce when we ask them to write, so that they can have a really clear and real grounding in what kinds of work they're going to do in classrooms. Laura, anything?
No, yeah, I was just going to say that I think especially for those of us who work in context where we are preparing teachers of English as a second language, rather than English as a foreign language, and we tend to have a lot of students who themselves maybe are primarily English speakers and never really learned English grammar themselves, we struggle quite a bit with their language awareness. So our US teacher candidates often have very low language awareness. So it's really difficult to do the assessment work, do the methods when it's just a bunch of fun strategies. And so part of professionalizing, you know, our field is, I think, constantly focusing on developing that language awareness. And sometimes there's a disconnect between these courses, an assessment course, a grammar course, a methods course. And sometimes students don't feel like the grammar or the assessment classes are practical enough. And I think a lot of us who teach methods feel we have a big weight to lift, because we kind of have to make sure to integrate the assessment and the grammar knowledge and put it into practice. So I think this is where this really meets a great need and gives us real material to work with to help us diagnose and see what our candidates, our teacher candidates' language awareness actually is. So thank you, Beth.
Thanks. Okay, so we draw in a couple of different frameworks. This one by Edge, which is termed Learning to TESOL, and it talks about the different steps that students can go through. Sometimes when we're working with teacher candidates, the first thing they do is to copy, right? So we present them with models and then they copy those traditional models in their own practice. We hope that over time they'll take those models and then they'll apply it. So rather than just kind of, you know, enacting somebody else's lesson plan, for example, they'll take it and they'll take it one step further and say, okay, this could fit in this other way or this other lesson plan. Moving forward, then we hope through that application, they start to think about theory in more concrete ways in their own practice, and articulate their own understanding of what's happening in their practice and why, which then, of course, moves to reflection. And this is something that I have always worked really hard with my candidates, because at least here in the US context, where sometimes that ESL teacher is the only teacher in a building, or sometimes in more rural areas, the only teacher in a district. And so that teacher is in the position of really having to interrogate their own practice in order to figure out what the next steps are. So the reflecting is definitely a key piece to being able to improve practice. And then from the reflection, we hope that they'll take that reflection and then turn it into deliberate acts or outcomes of thought. So meaning that they'll take that reflection and move forward in their practice, and then probably move back around in the circle in some other capacity. Continuing, Lampert and McDonald have designed this idea that there are 4 stages of mastery and confidence in TESOL. And I definitely have seen this in my candidates, and Laura, you can weigh in later about your experience with your candidates. But, you know, in our work as teacher educators, you know, the first thing that we try to do, or what we try to teach our novice teachers to do, is figuring out how to introduce the pedagogy. So how do they give students feedback on their writing? And then that moves to the next step where the teacher will try out giving feedback to student writing within a simulation task. So we move from something that's that's less developed to more developed, where they're approximating the pedagogy. Then they enact the pedagogy, giving feedback on writing to a real student in the form of fieldwork or practicum. So 1 and 2 are what we're doing, practicing in classrooms. And then 3 is when they're actually working with kids in the field. And then 4, again, we hope that they can analyze this pedagogy, reflect on it, and then bring it back. And this is all a little bit theoretical, but I have found definitely in my own practice that when you work with real texts written by real students, this process of introducing them and approximating gets them ready for that classroom in better ways than sometimes the textbooks or the more theoretical work that we do.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in there to say that this model of approximation is very well known in teacher ed in the US outside of TESOL. And it's basically deconstructing the practice and then reconstructing. And one of the things that I'm thinking of when you're talking about this, Beth, is, well, 2 things. One is that a lot of my teacher candidates are experienced teachers coming back to get a specialization in teaching TESOL, and they're harder to work with in a lot of ways because they have to unlearn to learn. So they come in without language awareness, but with very entrenched ideas about literacy development for monolingual students. And so that's really challenging. When they think about giving feedback, they focus on punctuation, transition words, things like that. They don't really see the language structures. And the second thing I'm thinking about is how, when we send our teacher candidates to the field to do work in classrooms where they would interact, with real students writing and et cetera, we're often not there. We're almost never there. So what they notice and report back to us in the class, in our methods courses, is what their partial view of what happened from their novice point of view. It's hard for us to walk through what was really going on. So this gives us a chance to bring the field into the classroom, because when we bring in student work, we can demonstrate, do think aloud, walk through what we're seeing, and it gives them those scaffolds that we can't often give out in the field.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so much of it does happen. You do wonder, of course, the teachers are trying to be the best teachers they possibly can be, but they can't see everything from the start. And so, how many times have we heard, well, I know the student knows this, but, and then the writing or some other speech sample, they're not integrating it. Well, that means that the student doesn't know it yet or is in the process of knowing it. And so I think that's something that the candidate needs to find their way through. Anyway, okay, so these are ways that we feel like using these authentic writing samples from students help our candidates develop mastery and confidence to a greater extent. Once they do hit a classroom, or they go back to their own classroom, as Laura was saying, and are able to address the needs of English learners to a better extent. So in our preparation for this presentation, we looked online for writing collections and were able to find some good ones. And we're hoping that you all will share the kinds of writing collections that you use in your practice as well. The more ways that we can share and collaborate and collect these, I think that's the better it will be for our teacher candidates and then ultimately for their students. So the ones that we're drawing from today are, sorry, I went straight to that link. Hold on one second. Okay, yeah. The WIDA, the WAPT, right? This is the language proficiency test that's given in more than 30 states here in the United States. And there are some writing samples that have been released and are available, even though they're from 2007, they're still very useful. So we'll look at a couple of those. Sorry, I don't know why that keeps popping onto the nicest slide. The nicest slide is the second one. This is, of course, the proficiency test that we use here in New York State. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there's a great training manual, and there are writing samples embedded in that you can pull for K-12 students. Another one is from Texas. These are annotated examples of student writing, and we're going to look at those in just a minute. And then there's a great resource from Alberta, which has very sophisticated materials for this kind of work. And so both speaking and writing. So we'll look at those a little bit more closely. Are you familiar with those? Has anybody seen these before? Or do you have others that you think should be here and are not? Well, if you have any ideas, you can put them in the chat later on.
Sorry, I have a question, Beth, just maybe others have this as well. Is there a way of sharing these links with folks outside of this presentation so that, I mean, I could take a screenshot of this, for example. I'm very interested in seeing one or two of these, but on my own time. So what would be the process for that? I mean, I'm not asking you to share your slides necessarily if you don't want to, but how could we share this with folks who might necessarily want to get some of these links?
Right, I can share the slides. I don't have any. I think I already shared them at TESOL, so. I
Okay,
have-
so if at the end there's an email for you, and if people want these slides, they can email you and to do it that way, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I just wanted to verify that. I think probably others are wondering the same thing. Thank you.
Definitely, no problem. Or we can just put them in the chat as well. I don't know. Laura, what do you think would be better?
Yeah, I think I need access to your final slide deck if you want to, if you're able to pop it to the side, or you can just put the link to this whole slide deck into the chat and I can also pull the links out.
Okay, yeah, because they're on that like second slide.
Yeah,
So
they're on
we
the
can-
second side. I can
Yeah.
pull them if I get this.
Right, do you want me to, I can just, I can just put this right up to you.
Okay.
Okay, hold on one sec.
Yeah,
What?
no, I'm sure people are happy to, and I see, yeah, the Alberta ones are very good in the chat. Nikki, yeah, the TELPAS. So places that have some kind of training protocol books for administering tests usually have scored writing samples. And it's nice to have a variety because once you've used some, they get a little dull. You don't want to, sometimes people have seen them. College level writing samples is a question in the chat as well.
Right, well, so these tend to go up to 12th grade, but I find that the secondary ones actually, when we're working with particularly from Alberta, they're at a really sophisticated level. So I think that they could work similarly for college level. I mean, it depends what you want to use them for. These are nice because if you're a new instructor to some of these classes and you want to use authentic writing samples, but you're not exactly sure, you know, how they might be rated, you can rely and refer to the benchmarks here. But what I like to do sometimes is to just take a piece of writing and, you know, we do the exploration together with my students. So, you know, they can look for, you know, in the grammar class, they can look for grammar, or in the assessment class, you know, we can look at a rubric and think, okay, you know, and of course I don't have all the answers, but that's the work that they'll do as teachers. So, you know, you need to be able to analyze these things to be able to give students reasonable feedback for growth.
You know, in terms of just thinking in terms of higher ed and college, a lot of times if universities have placement exams, there are, you know, norming books for those things that may or may not be things that could be shared. But I mean, Laura, does CUNY still use the Watt?
Yeah, I was going to say there are mostly, yeah, colleges. Yeah, I'm at the City University of New York. There's a big writing assessment here. And I would think that a lot of places are going to have those. And I agree
exactly.
too that the high school samples are going to be very similar. And for example, Alberta has samples from beginner, novice English speakers all the way up to very proficient. That would be very similar to what you would find, let's say, on a freshman writing sample. And I'm sure we could actually put together a few more because it might be nice to have a list of higher ed resources too. But anyway, continuing.
Well, yeah, TOEFL and IELTS, I mean, those are places where we can go to. I mean, there are obviously, you know, lots of materials there, and other tests. I think there's one in California as well. So yeah, we can pull those together for people who are interested in higher ed. Right, let's keep going. So I thought that it would be fun for us to start. Oh, here we go. with looking at the WEAT or the WAPT, right? So I hope that you can see in this slide, this is the rubric that they give. Now, depending on what you want to do with your candidates, you might really want to spend time on this. If you're in a WETA state and you're thinking that your teachers might have to give the WETA, and they really should know what this rubric is, then this maybe is worth the time. In New York State, we're going to work with the nicest slat more than that, but it's important for us when we're thinking about our candidates to look at the rubric, think about linguistic complexity, vocabulary usage, language control. This is how their writing is evaluated. And that's different depending on which test you're using. But so let's take a minute and let's look at this. So this is a writing task for grades 3 through 5. The students are supposed to complete the sentences with important school rules and then write 3 more important school rules. So these you can see, they start with sort of sentence frames and then 4, 5, 6. So I always think that these are kind of fun because they're funny what the kids actually say about what the rules of school should be. Okay, has everyone had a chance to read this child's impressions of what the rules are of school? Okay, great. Let's look at, and then they're supposed to write an extended section. What do you do if you're late to school? Answer this question with 3 to 5 sentences. So here we see, and I hope you can see this, but I will get in trouble and then I have to call home and then I will always come to school early. And then if I'm late again, I will get a detention and then I will never be late to school again. So always hopeful 3rd to 5th graders that this problem will be rectified. But if we're thinking about how we would rate this, let's look again at the linguistic complexity, vocabulary usage, and language control. And so like this is an activity that I do with my candidates. I say, okay, let's think about that, go back to the reading, check it out, see what the child wrote, see where you think it falls on this rubric. And then luckily, you get the answer through the WAPT. So this is one of their benchmarks. And so I wonder if you all got the right answer. This child is rated as a 3 because of the complexity of the sentences, is pretty successful, that the attempts have been made to use general and more specific language, and it's generally comprehensible. So that's a 3 on the WAPT. Any questions or comments? Okay, let's look at another one. This is a similar one. Same task.
I'm just going to comment as people are processing this language now. Or maybe you all are like me, where you're immediately seeing errors. We tend to see all the deficiencies when we look at writing. And one of the things that's great about WETA is, focusing on what the student can do. So sometimes that's a really good activity, is simply just to give the students, we'll just rip it apart and then say, okay, now let's do it, saying all the things the student is able to do and can communicate through their writing. And it's like, it's almost awkward, to go at it the other way. I'm not sure if that's something that you've noticed with your students, Beth.
Absolutely. I mean, I think so. They want to be, because my students are always graduate students, and so they're analytical thinkers. So they want to be able to analyze and say, oh, this bedroom, I think the child means bathroom. I think that they don't know how to use the commands in the negative form, right? Don't run, don't take, or talk, I guess. Don't play. Often I think my students will go straight to spelling, and that's always where I say, okay, you know what, that's the last step. We don't care that much. Can you make out the word? That's something we can talk to the student about, but I mean, that's not going to be number one. Like Laura was saying earlier, the capitalization and the period, sometimes that becomes the central focus point, and that doesn't really matter that much in writing. So I try to guide them away. But so once they do the analytical part, though, then when we're saying, okay, what feedback would you give to the students? It's important for you to know all of that stuff. But then what would you say to the student that they're doing well, first of all? Like, what are some great things that you see happening in this writing sample? And then from there, pick one or two things that maybe you would do a mini lesson based on this writing sample. But no red pen, no X's, none of that. Like, that's not productive, and it just makes students feel bad. How about you, Laura? Is it similar?
Definitely. It's an interesting tension, because I think often, again, speaking from my experience with US teachers, they're very hesitant to give corrective feedback, almost too much so. So it's like all of this throw away the red pen, and so you want to see the strengths, and you want to see writing as developmental, and where are they, what are they able to do, but where can they go next? And that's the part I think that can sometimes be difficult, is deciding out of this, what's the next linguistic form that this student is ready for. That takes a lot of experience. Honestly, if you sit with all of us, we would probably have some different ideas about that too. And to realize that there's probably a limited array, but there are an array of choices there probably for this student. Because understanding that that next goal, using it as formative assessment. This isn't just information. It's not a value judgment. It's an information point. But how do I now construct my lesson plan? How does it inform the design of where I'm going next?
Right.
Do you
Oh, go
guys,
ahead.
I'm just curious. I know I didn't want to jump in.
Please,
when I've
go
done
ahead.
things like this, I've also, obviously you're using the rubric, which the assessment, gets graded on. And a lot of times it's interesting to do it as kind of a norming thing and to just find out what they're giving on. I mean, oftentimes it's not very hard if it's a 6-point scale or something like that. It's obviously going to be a 1 or a 2 probably, but it is an assessment. When I use these kind of things in assessment classes, that's a useful skill that they may or may not have familiarity with. And it helps you understand why this is, for example, a 1 versus a 2, for example, in this case. As opposed to using this as something a student might do in a classroom where it's an assessment measure that you can then teach from. If this was going to be assessed as what it was designed for, I think, which is a placement, what would that number be and why?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are benchmarked, WIDA rated writing samples that are used to norm future teachers. So I mean, we can use it that way, but we can also use it kind of as imagine that it is a formative model. And I mean, for me, I think that I would say here, in number 1, we see do not play this. So the student has an awareness of this negative, oh my gosh, command. I'm sorry, I was thinking mandato, wrong language, negative command. But down here, the student doesn't know to use this. So this seems to me to be an easy fix. This would be an easy place to direct your attention, at least grammatically, for the next level. But so there's another piece to this, right? We didn't see the extended writing of this child. So let's look at what this child wrote in, what does this child do when he or she is late for school? Okay, so I don't know if that's enough time for you to kind of make your way through this, but this actually gives a lot more information about what the level at which this child is able to write right now. And from there, we can think that what the next steps will be. Again, a benchmarked response. So we know that this is going to be rated, and probably you have a better idea of what that rating is. And again, we can read the rationale, which is on the next slide. Everybody ready to see the spoiler? Okay, there, oh, that's the reminder. Okay, here it is.
This is a great example of language you would never give to a student. Like James was saying, this is, for like a testing purpose, but this is not feedback. And so I think going through those steps where students do some kind of, you do some kind of calibration or norming activity where we look at samples and we all kind of come to the same page. This is what the rubric means. You don't need a lot of specific language knowledge to do that. Teachers who have some familiarity with writing can pretty much see that which is a 1 and which is a 4, 5, 6, something like that. But I think it's turning it into instruction that is the part that we abandon a little bit, because again, students learn about this in grammar, they learn about an assessment, but then in the methods class, we don't get language specific enough. And so this is, if you were to talk to the student about their writing, what parts of this would you use and how would you phrase it? I mean, that's what's jumping out at me right now, Beth. What do you think?
Oh, no, 100%. I always take that next step. If I leave it here, if I arm my candidates with this kind of language, I think actually it's better not to do this kind of thing if this is where it stays. In an assessment class, it's really important to develop these kinds of stratifications, to be able to contextualize and rate in your head. But then we're not producing, especially in formative settings and with young children, we're not giving them a test report. We want them to maybe do another draft, or maybe we're going to design a mini lesson with some sort of aspect of that, of one of these weaknesses that we identify. Well, first of all, we're always going to tell them what they did well, and we're always going to ask questions. Let me see if I can go. We're always going to ask questions about, yeah, I think it's a good idea if you're sick not to come to school. I think that's a good reason. So you pull from here, even if it's very difficult to understand exactly what the student is, you pull something, you talk about content first, and then you design the next mini lesson, right?
On that slide with the those score that scorer language that we were just saying we wouldn't. Even this, I think a problem with, let me rephrase that. One of the ways that we, in all of our teacher prep courses, would aim more for that approximation or the deconstruction and reconstruction is by really observing carefully, being able to see or describe well. This is very evaluative. So comprehension is impeded throughout the text. What does that mean? What does that actually mean? Or they're not successful or they're unsuccessful, What does that mean? What are you actually seeing in the text? And again, I think when you're looking sometimes at the, when you're using materials from tests, they are not written that specifically from a language point of view. There's not a lot that really gives a new ESL teacher the language pieces here beyond vocabulary, So I think we still have far to go to kind of model really language specific type of feedback.
Great point. Great point. Well, let's keep going. Let's look at a few of these other collections. But this gives you an idea of how the WAPT information can be used, at least as real writing samples that you can produce and provide to your students. Other online collections of writing. Okay, so we have the nicest slat, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this in case people are not in New York, but here, it has the entire, sorry if you're getting dizzy from this. They have the speaking test first, and then toward the second part of the, hold on, let me pull this down. toward the second part of this test booklet is the writing. So again, here's a rubric. Here's the scale where they're looking at complexity of language, quality of language, coherence of response, degree of response, and mechanics. And then from here, they set the scene. This is about travel in the 1800s. And they post a prompt, and then the kids respond to the prompt. So here's another example. And I have used these in my methods classes because assessment is part of methods, because students are in the position of giving the nicest slat. Just to look at how these tests are content embedded as well as language proficiency tests. So these are very useful. They're also benchmarked, and you can also pull from speaking samples here for the nicest slat. Have you used the nicest slat, Laura?
Yeah, we hate it here in New York, but it's the good thing about all the money that goes to test developers is that they have to develop all of these samples at all different levels. Because I think what's also challenging with K-12, it's not just looking at a writing sample and saying, is it more at the beginning proficiency or advanced? It's for a kindergartner, is it beginning to, and for a 10th grader, is it begin, and in the content area, also. So using these materials, it's like almost all you need to unpack everything that's going on really for an English learner, especially in a English dominant kind of schooling situation.
Absolutely. Well, I just learned that Niceslat and Nicetel have changed hands from Metratech and are going to be managed by Pearson now. So that probably will introduce some changes here in New York State. Let's keep going. Then we have the TELPIS, these Texas annotated student writing, and I use these extensively. Let's see, if we just open this for a minute, you can see that they have an introduction here, but what is cool about this is that they have the same, well, if you're going to use it with your students, you might not want to let them know what level they are. You can decide if you want to share that information or keep it from them for them to kind of sort through, okay, I think because of this, the student is a higher level proficiency. It really helps them kind of develop some of that schema about thinking about language proficiency. But what's cool about this is that they have the same student and there are multiple writing samples from that same student. So here's student 1 from grade 2, and this student writes about planting a seed. Student writes about the most important thing, writes about several things all about me. So this one is all about me, about my family and me, all about me, about sports, all about me, about my school, all about me, about how I look like, and 3 goals, right? So these are all pieces from the same student. So you can see how the student writes in different prompts. This one's about math. The other ones are more narrative. So you can think about these in terms of what the student is doing and what is not doing. I love this one because I think that it's a really interesting, you can really talk about the content of how the student is describing themselves and what kinds of how can we help students to understand themselves? It's kind of an identity piece here. So I'll give you a minute and you can read about it. So there are a lot of things that you can do with this piece. Laura, I can pitch it to you from the start if you want to give some ideas.
Oh my goodness, I want our audience to do it. Let's see.
Okay, yeah, can we do that? How should we do it? Through the chat?
Oh, people can put in the chat, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
What do you think? What are
Yeah.
people thinking? I love this piece. It's great.
It is so great.
Yeah.
I feel like you get to know these kids.
Totally.
What was the question again? So if you're thinking about doing teacher education, working with teacher candidates, what kinds of things could they learn from this piece? Either about teaching, teaching the language, about writing, about themselves, about curriculum, about anything. Interlanguaging, Mariana says, okay.
What do you mean, Mariana? You want to unmute and tell us what you're noticing?
That makes me think that they translated like I have 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
and then it said old, so it's mixing.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
have 8 years. That's the first one.
Yeah.
Right, so you can see evidence of their L1 maybe, and that's a, that's a tricky structure in English. It's unlike a lot of other languages, so it's one that definitely needs, if we want it to be, I am 8 years old, we need to teach that as a formulaic kind of thing. Okay, yeah, Sean was saying that as well. Anybody
guess
else?
If I were doing this with a student or in a classroom with EL teachers and looking at this, you might ask them, what are some of your goals for this student? What would you want the student to be able to do after you work with them on this? What are 2 areas for improvement, for example? 2 questions that you might ask the student. How could you turn this into a more of a performance-based assessment measure, for example? I mean, what would be the next step on that front? Maybe, just looking at this first paragraph, maybe a performance-based assessment would be to, each one of them read this and draw a picture of this person. I mean, just thinking off the top, I'm trying to make it into the next level, something that might be more outside of this essay format. I mean, I love Laura's idea, and I think I do this in my own class. I try to, what can the student do? You can that could just be the first step right there. You might have a list of 4 things the student can do and 4 things they can't do, or 2 or 3, depending.
Yeah, and if you went from that, you can ask them to look for, using the word look. So look like. I imagine the prompt. So you could work backwards. What do you think the teacher's prompt was? It's probably, what do you look like? But all about me is it what I look like? But anyway, that's another story. And it's interesting. He talks about being a little brown and a lot of white. So I love this, but you look like, then they talk about look to my family and friends, I look like this. So they've used that phrase. So, what you might do next, and so that you can help them expand, make their language a little more varied or more sophisticated. So you can look for those, building on that, looking for what students can do, what do they control very well. They'll start to overuse that because that's comfortable. So what would be a next kind of language phrase that they might want to use, looking at what the prompt is. There's so much you can do with it, Beth, actually.
I know. Yeah, I mean, if you were able to conference with the child, of course, you would say how much you enjoyed learning so much about them. I mean, this child has so much voice in their writing. So you get a feeling from this writing of who this child is, some relationships with family and so on. If you wanted to develop this into a bigger piece, you could definitely ask the student to add some dialogue or to put in a quote, or like, why do you think that? Have them develop the content a little bit more beyond the grammar and all of that. But it's a very authentic writing piece, much like you'd get from a young English learner here in the States. And I love to offer this one to my candidates for them to really think about what it would be like to work with this child. Yeah. I just looked at the time, so I want to make sure that we get to the other writing samples. So let's continue on. So the Alberta one, this is kind of the treasure trove of all kinds of samples. And it's one that I hope that you can walk away from this presentation with this as part of your repertoire. There are writing samples, there are also videos and such. So we're going to just kind of look at some of these resources. So here is this I don't know, thank goodness for this university that they put this together, or Learn Alberta. I don't actually know if that's a university or not. But if you look on at the home here, it tells you what all of the resources are, including benchmarks, I-CAN statements for English learners, writing samples, and videos, which have speaking samples, which is another presentation that we should probably do, and another very difficult thing to find online. Then if you move to, say you're interested in specific benchmarks, you can search things out here. So let's say we're looking at writing, so not listening, not speaking. Let's look at writing. Let's say that we want pieces that highlight something about vocabulary or syntax. So you can click those, and then you can view these. Here are the rubrics that are used when people are evaluating these samples. So they have a 5-point scale, which seems similar to WIDA or NICESLAT. And then you can pick which levels from which grades. So it's a really cool tool. We can't really show you all of it here, but what I have used a lot are these writing samples. So they're here by grade all the way through grade 12. And they get, obviously, they increase in sophistication depending on how old the kid is. So if we look, I don't know, what should we look at? Some of them are really long. Maybe grade 5, level 3, just for the sake of time. So here you can see the actual piece written by the student. And that's an important thing that I find that my teacher candidates have to practice too, is trying to figure out, what is the kid saying? You know, can I read this writing? That's a whole skill in and of itself for a language teacher. And so I like for them to see the students' handwriting sometimes it's not possible, but and then here's a writing sample. This one has already been scored according to linguistic vocabulary, linguistic grammar, syntax, strategic, sociolinguistics, discourse, and editing. And they have scored it according to the benchmarks that we just saw, you know, where the rubrics were. And they give it an overall level of 3. Now, you know, if you want to use it for assessment purposes, you can do that, but you can just also have your students read the sample, and here it is transcribed, written, you know, typed out. And you know, you can think about what are they doing well? What are they doing that needs work? And you know, what might be the next step? What might be a mini lesson that you would put together? So I think in the chat, some people are saying that they've used this before. Did I see that? Oh, okay. Heather's talking about OPI. Yeah, there are some videos. And the thing is, sometimes these things are online and then over time they disappear. So if there's a way that you can download them or capture them, I recommend that you do that, because things don't stay online forever. So let's look. Here are some samples, and these are the questions that I always pose to my candidates. Let's just look at the first one, and then we can also open to questions. What are some strengths that you see, and what are some areas where you as the teacher could conference with the writer to help them grow? So here's an authentic sample of a student. Now you can imagine what the prompt is, but you know, where might you go with this? What might your next lesson be? So if you had to say what the student's doing well, what's the student doing well?
I would say from the beginning, the student's just very descriptive. There's lots of language here. You know, we can understand a lot about this student, what they can and can't do.
Absolutely, yeah, and they understand the difference between can and can't, right? They understand something about tense, right? Because we see I can speak, I can dance, but I can, right? Understanding that that's going to happen in the future. So they're trying to put the can in the future. So they understand something about that. we get to know that, you know, they can dance in Fortnite, which not everybody can do. And if this were my student, I would definitely ask them about that. So what are some of the things that you might be able to say from this writing sample and then figure out what to do next? Nikki says providing reasons. How so?
No, I meant that they were good at providing reasons,
Absolutely.
that they provided a rationale for why they can or cannot do something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these are sophisticated sentences. They've got multiple clauses going on. So, you know, that's a communicative control that we don't always see. So what might be something that you would do next with this child?
With their more on this using conjunction, it looks like they do.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. Could you say that again?
Around here. Do you hear me now?
Yeah, now, yes.
Okay, so I would work more on this, adding conjunction, because I see there's already use of but. Maybe I add and add similar example of what cannot do. Like I can dance in Fortnite. I don't know what that is, but I can't in whatever.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, Fortnite is some video game that kind of was the rage here in the States a few years ago. I don't know if it still is, but
I might look at register with this student and talk
Okay.
about formal versus informal spelling, like cousins, for example, which they might text but not use in academic settings. And then that might be a discussion to have with them, because that's the kind of thing that'll drive like a mainstream teacher crazy. So you want to probably alight on that.
Sure.
Yeah, and then just more focus on, you know, a modal versus a regular, or what do we call regular verbs these days, right? And some of it's there. And sorry, there's noise in the background. I can speak, I can dance, but then I can too take care of my sister. So it's not 100% mastered yet.
Right. Right. And so we can decide, you know, is that where we want to focus? Do we want to give a bunch of I can, and help them with that grammatical feature? Do we want them to develop their ideas further about things they can do and things they can't do? This can't with 2 seems to be more consistent. So maybe that's where we would go next. Anyway, that's what I would hope my candidates would be thinking about as they see this writing sample, and really like analyzing it and saying, okay, this is what the student's doing well. Here's the pattern. Here's where it falls off. I don't know. And then they develop a lesson plan on can and can't. And they, you know, they would need to develop a material, and they would need to, you know, have an active part with the students. So that's just one small idea, or one way that these can be really useful. I think I'm going to skip ahead. So we wonder what authentic writing collections you use, and we can just leave it here and for last questions in the 5 minutes that we have left.
Yeah, when you mentioned about speaking, Beth, it reminded me, I put it in the chat here. This is from Purdue University and Wayne Wright's work. This is a wonderful website has lots of student profiles, elementary, middle, and high school about the student. And then it gives for each student writing samples, also running records of their reading ability, as well as oral proficiency scores. And the speaking samples are an informal as well as a formal, more academic type speaking. And I find it's just really, really useful. Oh, thanks, Heather, for reposting. If
Is
you
that
have
the ellipse or?
yeah, it's the L
yeah,
profiles. Yeah,
okay.
it's a great website that I use heavily, and it's wonderful because you can have students work on it without seeing how the experts scored, and then afterwards, and I usually have them do that in groups or pairs, because it's really hard when you're a novice to do these activities without bouncing it off of other people. And then they get to see kind of how it was scored. And it is controlled. Again, it's a controlled environment as opposed to just go out in the field and observe stuff, which we don't really know what happens. So
One other thing I was gonna mention really quickly that I think about a lot when we have students, when students are looking at EL writing, I like to have them read it aloud because they do get caught up in the spelling and punctuation. So read it out loud and even read it before you look at it. You know, one person reads it, the other person just listens. And also when we do speaking, have them transcribe some of it because when they're speaking, the pronunciation can get in the way. But if you write it down, you can see, I think it makes it easier to see what students can do when we're not caught up in what typically catches us about reading or writing. So just to throw that out.
that's a great tip.
It is, yeah. Yeah, I love the idea of transcribing. I think it's so useful.
Mhm.
I actually, with my candidates, I have them speak themselves and then transcribe themselves so that they have an idea of how they say things, because that's enlightening to them too.
Mhm.
Other ideas?
Yeah, I have used TELPAS samples in my teacher education classes. I teach courses on language assessment and for master's students who are practicing teachers. And I actually got some kind of pushback from them because they said, well, all these samples were all created under timed assessment conditions, right? Like, and they say, well, you know, in my classes, I use a process writing approach where the students are going through multiple drafts, you know, they're doing the peer feedback and And so, you know, these particular samples were all created under these timed, you know, produce a product conditions. And, you know, so I've gotten some pushback from my students about that they don't like want to assess those because they feel like that's not what their students are doing in the classes. So it would be great if we had some samples that were produced during a process approach where we could see, here's the first draft, here's what the learner produced, you know, after peer review, and then this is what they produced at the end. But I know, you know, it's difficult to get those kinds of samples. But I think that would also be very informative for our teacher education students to see how that writing develops over time.
You know, Nikki, when you were saying that, I thought that one of the ways I've gotten that in the past is through student portfolios within the student teaching, because you ask them to do that kind of thing in student teaching. You know, work on a process piece of writing with students, and you know, you could take those, obviously mask them, and then I've used them in that way in classes because you know that you've got the writing samples over the course of several drafts with students who are working with real ELs. This is something I've done, and we all have those portfolios, you know, that we're looking at electronically or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Nikki. And it's interesting to, as James said, you know, to embed it as an assignment so you can harvest these materials off the students themselves, but then they're not widely available, like you're saying, you know, but you can kind of create them for yourself. One of the challenges with that kind of writing is by the end, the product it looks perfect. So I really like what you pointed out about getting it all along the way, because if you just capture student writing from a process approach, the final piece, it'll look perfect and kind of not show you. So I like those stages. And one last thing that I've used for years, I don't even know where I got it originally from, but it's a set of 10 writing samples. And I give them to students and they try to decide the language level of the student and all this. And then I do the big reveal, which is it's the same student over the course of the year in September, October, November, December. And they're just blown away by that because writing can drastically improve, you know, among ELs. And that's really exciting. And our students hear a lot about like, oh, writing takes years and years and years to develop, but it's really rewarding for them to see progress. So like what Nikki is talking about, or finding, even just asking your teachers to collect a monthly sample in some way helps them realize their own contribution to students' writing development, and for the student to be able to see their own writing progress as well. I know we're almost out of time. Beth, I'll let you wrap up.
Sure. Yeah, no, I love that idea. And the idea of process writing, of course, that's what we hope that ELs are able to engage in. And so thanks for raising those points. Right. So, thank you for spending this time with us. I hope that some of these resources may be helpful to you. I hope that it's helpful for you to think about how to integrate authentic writing into your classes with teachers to be, to really help them get their feet set in the classroom before they actually end up there. So we're happy to share our slides and any resources. Maybe Heather or James, you can help us figure out how to do that.
Yeah, sure.
But thanks, everyone. We really appreciate your attendance and hope
Yeah.
it's been helpful.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Laura and Beth, for a really terrific presentation with lots of great links. I know I've opened them all up and we're going to be looking at them. There's some stuff I don't know about at all. So that's a terrific, wonderful resources here. And also just really wonderful, interesting presentation. And we've shared the slides here. And I think if anyone else wants the slides, they can email you. And also this presentation will be available online for folks. And I'll be making an announcement about that. So people can just reach out to you that way. I think it might just be the easiest way. Thank you again, Laura and Beth, for taking the time this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. I want to just give a promotion to, we'll be doing our TEIS town hall on Wednesday, March 1st, which is a couple of weeks from now. And that'll be kind of a convention preview and also a newsletter preview or post viewing, I don't know. And so please look at the newsletter and come to that town hall. And look forward to seeing many of you at TESOL. And please join us for our business meeting on Thursday evening at TESOL. And drinks and dinner afterwards. It'll be wonderful to see many of you in person. Thanks again. Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Beth.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.